The Oathbreakers, the cursed men of the mountain, the army of the dead. The mysteries surrounding the paths of the dead and its inhabitants are one of the most discussed topics in Tolkien's Legendarium. Who were they? What was their history? Why did they break their oath? And what powers did they have? In today's episode, we seek to unravel these mysteries and the story of these forgotten people as we explore the paths of the dead. So the Oathbreakers were once men who carved out their home in the White Mountains. They were most likely related to the Dunlendings, and during the dark years of Middle-earth, they worshipped Sauron. However, after the fall of Númenor, Isildur's ships arrived at the mouth of the Anduin, and he sailed up the Great River where he founded the realm of Gondor. He brought with him many artifacts and relics from Númenor, and among these was a great black stone, round in shape and as tall as a man. This stone looked so unearthly, some even believed that it must have fallen from the sky, and Isildur placed it on a summit known as Erech. It was atop the summit that Isildur met the king of the mountains, who swore allegiance to him upon the stone. Now Sauron returned to Middle-earth, and once again he started to grow in power as he called his forces and old allies to his land. And so, Isildur summoned the men of the mountain to fulfill their oath and join him to take up arms against Sauron. And yet, in Isildur's hour of need, they chose to break their oath, preferring to flee into the safety of their mountain rather than take part in open war against Sauron. Isildur was furious at this betrayal, and he turned to their king and said, "Thou shalt be the last king, and if the West prove mightier than thy Black Master, this curse I lay upon thee and thy folk, to rest never until your oath is fulfilled, for this war will last through years uncounted, and you shall be summoned once again ere the end." It's interesting to note that if Sauron had actually been victorious against the forces of the West, then the curse would not have fallen upon the men of the mountain, since it depended on the West proving that they were mightier than Sauron. Isildur's wrath was so intense that the men of the mountain fled before him, and they dared not join Sauron's forces either, preferring to shut themselves in the dark secret passages of the mountains, disconnected from the outside world, as they stopped having dealings with other men. Their numbers would slowly dwindle till there were none left alive. Now all of this occurred during the Second Age, and it would be thousands of years later until we hear about them again. Sometime between the years 1864 and 1975 of the Third Age, there lived a seer named Malbeth who served King Arvedui, the last king of Arnor. He had the gift of foresight, and one of his prophecies spoke about the paths of the dead, the siege of Gondor, and Aragorn's choice to face the Oathbreakers. He said, "Over the land there lies a long shadow, westward reaching wings of darkness. The tower trembles, to the tombs of kings doom approaches, the dead awaken. For the hour is come for the Oathbreakers. At the stone of Erech they shall stand again, and there a horn in the hills ringing. Who shall the horn be? Who shall call them from the grey twilight, the forgotten people, the heir of him to whom the oath they swore? From the north shall he come, need shall drive him. He shall pass the door to the paths of the dead." And yet, before Aragorn, we know of one other man that dared to pass through the paths of the dead. His name was Baldur, son of Breago, and he was a prince of Rohan. During his time, Rohan was still a young kingdom, and the Rohirrim would travel across the lands, seeking out places of refuge. It was on such a journey that Baldur and his father Breago came upon the paths of the dead. As they approached its door, they noticed an old man sitting on its threshold. At first, they thought he was a stone statue, for he didn't move, nor did he speak a word. Yet, when they attempted to pass by him and enter the paths of the dead, the old man spoke out and said, "The way is shut, the way is shut. It was made by those who are dead, and the dead keep it until the time comes. The way is shut." Breago then asked, "And when will that time be?" But he was left without an answer, for the old man suddenly died and fell to the ground. We're never told who this old man was, though I believe that he was one of the last living descendants of the men of the mountain. Despite his warning, Baldur would return to the paths of the dead once more, for during a feast of Rohan to celebrate the newly built hall of Meduseld, Baldur had drunk too much, and he rashly swore to pass through the door of the paths of the dead, and he was never seen among men again. and nobody would know what befell him until hundreds of years later. When Aragorn led the Grey Company through the paths of the dead, they came across a skeleton in a large room. It was clear that the skeleton had once belonged to a mighty warrior, and it was still clad in mail. It was also clear that the bones belonged to a nobleman, for its belt was made of gold and adorned with garnets, and his helmet too was gilded with gold. Before his bones stood a mighty stone door, sealed shut, and the skeleton's finger bones were still clawing at cracks in the door. Besides him lay his sword, broken and notched, as if in a final act of utter desperation he threw it at the stone door. This skeleton belonged to Baldur, and it is clear that he spent his final moments desperately trying to get through that stone door. Where it led, what lied behind it, and how Baldur became trapped there are somewhat of a mystery. However, Tolkien does shed some light on this. In Vinyar Tengwar, issue 42, Tolkien states that the men of the mountain had built temples in secret valleys and caverns beneath the mountains. Some of these temples were of immense size, and they were often surrounded by dark trees. They served a dark purpose, as Tolkien describes them as evil, and we're told that the stone door where Baldur's corpse was found was the entrance to an evil temple hall. Tolkien also says that Baldur had probably reached this door unopposed, but when he found the stone door closed shut, the dead silently crept upon him and broke his legs, leaving him to die alone in the darkness, filled with despair and unable to find any way out. I wonder whether they attacked him because he had tried to get past this door, or if they had patiently waited to corner him. It's plausible that this evil temple was used to worship Sauron or Morgoth, for we know that when Sauron held dominion over Middle-earth during the Dark Years, the men of the mountain had worshipped him and adored him. This temple might have also held many treasures and secrets, for after coming across Baldur's corpse, Aragorn cries out to the dead, telling them to keep their hoards and secrets hidden, for it was not his errand to seek them out. Despite all the mysteries surrounding Baldur's death, I think we can agree that his final moments must have been terrifying, alone in the dark, and we'll never know whether he died from starvation, the wounds inflicted upon him, or perhaps from fear itself. After Baldur's disappearance, no one ever tried to pass through the paths of the dead or discovered secrets, and it obtained a dreadful reputation. In the year 2019 of the Third Age, when the Rohirrim were mustering at Dunharrow before the siege of Gondor, some reinforcements arrived to bolster their numbers. These were the sons of Elrond, Elrohir, and Elladan, along with 30 Dunedain of the north, led by Halbarad, a kinsman of Aragorn. Elrohir had also brought word from his father, Elrond, advising Aragorn to remember the paths of the dead, if haste is necessary, though Aragorn at first was reluctant to do so. However, later on that day, he looked into the Palantir of Orthanc, and he saw that an army of corsairs were travelling from the south to raid the coastal regions of Gondor, such as Lebanon and Belfalas, and this would significantly reduce the amount of southern Gondorian soldiers that could come to Minas Tirith's aid, and so he decided to pass through the paths of the dead, using them as a shortcut to come to the aid of southern Gondor, while perhaps also bringing an army of forgotten people with him, an army of Oathbreakers, an army of the dead. Aragorn was joined by his companions, Gimli and Legolas, along with the sons of Elrond and the company of Dunedain, his kinsmen. Together, they passed into the shadow of the haunted mountain. The very air here seemed cursed, and as they walked past the lines of ancient stones, a feeling of dread fell upon them. Eventually, they came across a single stone pillar that stood in their path, and it seemed to emanate a feeling of dread, for Gimli exclaimed how it chilled his blood, and their horses refused to pass the stone until the riders dismounted and led them by hand. And so they came to the dark door carved in the face of the mountain. Fear flowed out from it like a grey vapor, and above the doors were signs and figures that were carved into its arch. We're told that here the company came to a halt, and that none among them was free from fear, apart from Legolas, for whom the ghosts of men held no terror, for he saw them as powerless and frail. I find this to be incredibly interesting, whether the sons of Elrond felt fear also, or if it was merely an oversight, since they too were elves. though we can never really know, I just thought I'd mention it. Anyway, their horses once again panicked and refused to pass through the door, though Aragorn led the way in, for in that hour his will was so strong that all the Dúnedain and their horses followed him. As they walked through the tunnels, nothing assailed the company or stood in their path, though with every step, fear steadily grew, and an unseen host was following them in the dark. They were also surrounded by endless whispers, the voices of the dead. When Aragorn came upon the corpse of Baldur, he turned to the whispering darkness behind him and demanded that they let him pass, as he summoned them to the Stone of Erech. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, and the room was filled with a dreadful, utter silence. And then, a chill blast blew through the room, and all their torches died out and could not be rekindled. The company pressed on in the darkness, and they finally heard the tinkle of water and a promising hint of light that slowly grew. And so they passed through another gateway, and they reached a steep road that would lead them to the Blackroot Vale. As they descended, they were followed by the dead, and Legolas describes their host as shapes of men and of horses, and pale banners like shreds of clouds, and spears like winter tickets on a misty night. Many people lived in Blackroot Vale, and as the host approached, lights went out in the houses nearby, doors were shut, bells rang out, and the people cried out in terror and ran. "The King of the Dead! The King of the Dead is come upon us!" But Aragorn pushed on, and just before midnight, surrounded by utter darkness, they reached the Hill of Erech. Elrohir then passed Aragorn a silver horn, and he blew upon it, and in that darkness, those that stood near heard the sound of answering horns. A great host then gathered around the hill, and Aragorn stood by the Stone of Erech. "Oathbreakers, why have ye come?" "To fulfill our oath and have peace." Aragorn then announced that he was Isildur's heir, and he summoned the dead to join him to cleanse Pelargir from the servants of Sauron. If they helped him, he would hold their oaths fulfilled, and they could finally know peace. Aragorn then led this host to Pelargir, and the closer they got to the armies of Mordor, the stronger the host of the dead seemed to Legolas. Legolas says that a gleam was in their eyes, perhaps from the thought of redemption and peace. As they approached the lands of Linhir, they saw a battle taking place between the men of Lamadon and an army of corsairs and Haradrim, though when these mortals caught sight of the army of the dead, they fled in terror. Only the Lord of Lamadon, called Angbor, dared to face the host, and Aragorn asked him to gather all his men that were brave enough to join them and ride behind them. When they reached the city of Pelargir, they found the main corsair fleet, and some of these ships had already started to set sail, for the corsairs that had fled from the army of the dead had brought word to them, and terror was rampant among their forces. However, the Haradrim still had a great army, and as they were driven to the shores, they turned, ready to fight. At this moment, Aragorn stopped and cried out, "Now come! By the Black Stone I call you!" And the army of the dead finally swept out from behind him, accompanied by the sound of faint cries and dim horns blowing. Legolas described it like the echo of some forgotten battle in the dark years long ago. Though they had drawn their ghostly pale swords, they had no need for them, for the terror they brought was enough. None would withstand them. They passed over the water towards the corsair ships, and the corsairs leapt overboard in fear. Some were slain, some drowned, and some fled towards their land on foot, and none were left to resist Aragorn's host. Aragorn then summoned the Oathbreakers once more, and as they stood before him, a red gleam in their eyes, he cried out to them in a loud voice, "Hear now the words of the heir of Isildur. Your oath is fulfilled. Go back and trouble not the valleys ever again. Depart and be at rest." The King of the Dead then stood out before his host, and he broke his spear and cast it down. He bowed low towards Aragorn and turned away, and his host then vanished swiftly, like a mist driven away by a sudden wind. Though the story of the host of the dead ends here, I'd like to discuss a few more points before ending this video. So when Legolas describes the Oathbreakers fighting at Pelargir, he says that he didn't know whether their swords could still cut and harm mortals, since their power of fear was enough. And this is often discussed, whether they could inflict physical damage. I feel that considering the tale of Baldur and how they broke his legs, we can almost say for certain that they could still cause physical harm. It's also interesting to note that during periods of war and strife, the dead would sometimes come forth from their mountains to the Harrowdale. Whether this was simply because they were linked to death, or if they became more active as they hoped to be called upon is uncertain, though I feel that the latter is more likely. Finally, I'd like to quickly point out the power oaths had in Middle-earth. I feel the Oathbreakers' oath is best compared with that of Gollum, when he swore to serve the Master of the Precious. This gave Frodo control over Gollum, that he could command him to leap from a height, or into fire, or even to choke. Similarly, when the Oathbreakers betrayed Isildur, he could curse them into one death, if the West proved victorious. It is clear that oaths in Middle-earth were not to be taken lightly, and that there was great power in them. Anyway friends, this wraps up today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you can, leave a like, for it helps this channel immensely, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I'd like to thank you all for the patience you've had, since I was quite busy in real life and I couldn't upload any videos, especially my patrons. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we can once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.